Coach Stacy here, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Negative opposition strategy. Now that we understand what the affirmatives burden is, proving all of the stock issues true, we're going to start learning about the negatives role because in a debate, the affirmative has to have an opponent, and that opponent is usually called the negative or the opposition. So we're going to learn about that, learn about the roles, and the basic strategy of how to approach winning a debate round as the negative. Now, there are many schools of debate. In the school of debate that I am leading, we are just simply focused on what are our basic burdens in policy debate as the negative debate team in order to win. Where it's very simple. You have to provide refutation. That means you need to disagree with the affirmative. And for the purposes of where you're starting off at, you need to disagree with everything. Now, you're not just going to use your own analysis, that means your own opinion or your own experiences to determine how you disagree. You're going to do research and you're going to find evidence from experts that are going to tell you many reasons why you should not pass the affirmative plan. But your first burden always to know, on no matter what stock issue, is to always disagree. So if you ever get lost, remember that you first need to understand your opponent's argument. What are they advocating for? What are they saying are the problems and why should we solve them? Go to the core of that and disagree with that and tell us why those things don't need to be solved. So for example, on our example debate case, our team case, our first harm is that marginalized workers continue to suffer discrimination. Well, your job is to disprove that. Your job is to say that marginalized workers do not suffer discrimination. Or if you know it's obvious that marginalized workers do continue to suffer discrimination, then you want to say that the affirmative plan can't solve for that, or that it has a different cause, or that marginalized workers may continue to suffer discrimination, but you have a plan that can solve better. Also, you want to say later on in the debate that those marginalized workers will possibly turn against the federal government or turn against the company if you pass this policy, because it may create more poverty, it may create more discrimination, it may entrench those problems even further to where those problems and those harms are never solved. So your first job is to always disagree. And that's on every stock issue, no matter it be the harms, the plan, no matter it be inherency or solvency, especially when we talk about topicality and other complex theory positions. If you're ever confused, your first job is to listen, write notes, and understand what your opponent is saying, and then disagree with that. We'll show you how to disagree line by line and on and off case later, but for right now, understand your first burden in your first debate is to disagree with your opponent. As you're learning to debate on the negative, you want to focus on one stock issue at a time, but you never want to only try and win one stock issue, but you only are forced and required as one of your burdens to win one stock issue. So the way that we approach it is we begin with the harms. You disagree with those harms first. You disagree with the inherency evidence second. And then you go through to the plan and through solvency, and you disagree with those. And you have to disagree with those in a very organized manner, in a very structured way. And so here's where we begin on how we provide disagreement and refutation on each stock issue. There are many ways that you can refute arguments and that you can disagree with your opponent in policy debate. Our approach is a very organized and structured approach in the beginning for novice debaters, which all of you are at this current moment. And as you develop your own style, you'll be able to find ways to change the foundation of the structure that I'm giving you to be able to argue in your own words in a more comfortable manner. But for now, these are the requirements that our judges are looking for when they're judging you, and that I'm looking for when teaching you to make sure that you are understanding how you're to approach this. So it's a very structured way. The first thing that you do when an opponent says an argument, such as, even the president does not favor a federal jobs guarantee from our contention to inherency card, your first job is to recite that opponent's argument. So if I'm your opponent and I'm the affirmative, you would say, well, Coach Stacy's first argument is that the president does not favor a federal jobs guarantee. Very simple. You can recite that and rephrase that shorter than that and say, the president doesn't favor a federal jobs guarantee. You can cut out my name. You can also say, my opponent claims the president doesn't favor a federal jobs guarantee. Or you can go even faster and say, contention two, president doesn't favor an FJG, right? However, you are able to get that reciting of the opponent's argument out, that lets the judge know that you are taking that under consideration, that is being addressed, right? You have to examine that because you want to make sure that you are telling the judge where you are, as well as you're formulating your response to it. Your response has to be linked to your opponent's prior argument, their analysis. So if we're refuting what the president favors, then you want to mention that and say the president does not favor a federal jobs guarantee according to my opponent. And then we'll move on to the next way that you're able to refute, clinch, as well as tie back, cross apply, and extend more arguments. So it can get a little complicated. And believe me, you're not expected to learn and master this year or even over the next few years. But there will be some of you who instantly be able to analyze this because it'll become familiar to you from the classroom in your English language arts essay structure as you develop as a writer or as you start to remember and reflect on and perform in class. You'll see that this is part of how you write your standard essay in class. So it'll give you a lot of practice in writing, but also you want to make sure that you're considering what the topic is we're dealing with. And it helps us to stay in order if we first recite the argument. So after reciting the argument, you definitely want to go straight to the refutation. And refutation is just disagreeing, but it's a lot more than that, right? There are different ways that you're able to refute an opponent's argument. The first thing that you can obviously do is just say, look, this isn't true. But you have to be more specific and tell us why. Now, you can tell me that under contention for solvency, the evidence says a federal jobs guarantee is a critical investment and solves issues dating back decades. And I can say that it may be critical, but another critical investment to me, as the negative, could be an investment in the military or an investment in schools. Paying teachers more money could be an investment in infrastructure, such as something to deal with not a federal jobs guarantee, but tax incentives for corporations to hire more workers so that they can pay the government more taxes and then help people create more jobs. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that you refute that argument directly. And there are different ways that you can do that. And you can refute one argument with one argument, 5 arguments, or 15. In debate, generally, the debater that wins one argument has many refutations for it. So if your opponent is saying that pigs don't fly, you don't want to say, well, pigs don't have wings, because your opponent could be talking about a cartoon where the pig is obviously flying. So you want to make sure that you're able to be more specific and that you're also able to give multiple reasons why that argument is not true. It's important for you to refute the argument. A lot of times debaters just recite what the opponent said. You never want to do that. Oftentimes they just go straight to the refutation and the judge doesn't know where you are in the debate. And what I mean where you are is which stock issue are you on? Which argument are you covering? Because when you start to look at the evidence in the case, you're going to see there's a lot of information out there on screen and on your paper, and you're going to have to be able to follow that information. So you want to be able to tell us where you are, and providing that specific recitement of the argument and then the refutation directly helps us to keep track of what you're saying. And it's an easy way for someone to memorize your argument. So refutation is going to be a skill that we're going to work on a lot. Okay, we're going to make sure that you know how to analyze a person's argument, that you know to take the appropriate notes to make sure that you have the main idea written down, which are pretty much the premises and the conclusions of the argument, that you can formulate the arguments, that you're able to avoid logical fallacies and all of the pitfalls that the negative wants to avoid as they're providing refutation for the affirmative. And you also want to be detailed, and you got to be able to do your research, right? One of the things that you'll know is that relying on evidence and policy debate to provide adequate refutation and disagreement, you need evidence. So you're going to have to do that research. So when you look to our Solvency A card that says a federal jobs guarantee is a critical investment and solves issues dating back decades, from Presley and Stein in 2021, you want to find an article, you want to find a publication, an interview, a source from an expert that disagrees with that directly says that no, it's not critical and it won't solve issues. Because this affirmative case is saying that if you give a federal jobs guarantee, that's going to help us to solve decades old civil rights issues of discrimination, especially against African American women. Now, the affirmative wants to advocate for that plan. The negative doesn't have to say, well, we don't want Black women to have more rights and have issues solved that they've been advocating against and dying for hundreds of years. Of course not. But what you can say is the affirmative's way of doing that is not going to lead to the world they're promising you. So we'll learn how to provide refutation without, you know, losing your moral high ground or, without saying something that's kind of morally reprehensible that you don't want to say, right? And sometimes you may want to say something you disagree with politically or personally, but you always want to make sure that you kind of maintain who you are in the debate, especially as you get better at debating, because it helps you to advocate better for yourself and provide better refutation if you're saying what you want to say instead of what you think the judge and the audience wants to hear, because it's easier for you to be able to support that. Refutation is probably the longest section of this video because it's the most important. Because if you ever get lost in the debate, if you ever think on the negative, I can't hear what they're saying, I don't know what they're saying, it's too complex, look at the topic. You think I'm on the negative, I'm on the opposition, I disagree, and spend your whole time disagreeing as much as possible. Oftentimes you'll see debaters, I voted for plenty of debaters in college, varsity, national championship tournaments, maybe not the national championship round, but at tournaments where high-level debaters kind of get lost in the debate because it's disorganized, their opponent's going really fast, maybe it's just a simple case of neither opponent really, clashing or interacting with their opponent's arguments. But that's why you recite them and you analyze it, right? And then you refute it because you want to provide that direct clash. Otherwise, it's not debate if you're not refuting. After you refute the argument, you have to clinch your negative argument. Now, clinching the argument is done many ways. In policy debate, clinching the argument is oftentimes just referring back to what the initial claim was by your opponent, what your initial argument was to provide the refutation. And this is not repeating it, right? Because oftentimes you can go on for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 1 to 2 minutes with one or two specific arguments. You don't want to repeat those. You want to sum those up. But also when you clinch that, you want to conclude it. You want to kind of give us a strong concluding statement about what that means into today's round. And then you're going to do something that you always want to do as a writer when you clinch and you conclude something, is that you're going to kind of give us a slogan or a statement that we can remember that's attached to the argument in general. And you'll learn how to do that more and more as you get better at debate. After you clinch that argument, you've got to do what we call tiebacks, okay? And when you call tiebacks, what that means is that your argumentation is you begin with reciting an argument, you refute your opponent's argumentation, right? You disagree with what they said, you clinch that argument. What does it mean for you to now have refuted that, right? If my opponent claims that a federal jobs guarantee will reduce poverty, and I've said that a federal jobs guarantee won't reduce poverty because Walmart, the gas stations, the oil companies, they're just going to raise prices. And so we're going to actually pay more because inflation is going to rise. If that's my argument on the negative, and I say, so overall, as I'm clinching it, what that means is that we're never going to solve for these harms as I clinch that. So I tie that back to any part of the case, right? So I can tie that back to harms contention A that says marginalized workers continue to suffer discrimination. Well, then I'll say marginalized workers will still suffer discrimination, right? And those marginalized workers are not going to be able to live the American dream because they're still going to be paying high prices. That means employers are still going to prefer a certain type of worker because employers are going to look like the same employers of today. They're not going to look like the entrepreneurs of tomorrow post passing the plan, right? So you always want to make sure that you tie that argument back after you've clinched it to the larger point. And this can be complex, right? And this can be something that you learn to do over time, but you have to practice it over and over to be able to be an artisan about it, to be able to create a great flow as you're speaking powerfully and making sure that you're being organized. It's a tough thing to do, and it can take years to learn. So the main thing that you want to do is you provide that refutation, you disagree, and tying back keeps you on point, but it also makes sure that you are pushing those arguments against the winning arguments of your opponent. So you're not just talking into space, you're directing that argument somewhere. So a tie back is kind of like a connector, right, to the opponent's argument to make sure you directly refute and attack that. So some people don't like the forceful language of debate. I do, because it's a battle, it's a conflict. You're going to win or lose. Some people are going to, have a lot of joy, and some people are going to cry. It happens every day in debate. So make sure that you understand the structure of what we do so you can give yourself the best opportunity to win, because being on the negative is difficult, but it's also a great way to be able to win and show everyone how prepared you are. Now, cross-applying your arguments can be difficult in forensics, in debate, when you are, just learning to recite, refute, clinch, and tie back. But as you're tying back your argumentation, right, you're going to realize that, well, if I am tying this argument saying that a federal jobs guarantee will actually cause inflation and won't reduce poverty, then I have to use that offense not only on the solvency evidence, but also I can use it on solvency evidence A, right? Because when you're arguing in debate, you're arguing argument per argument. So each statement made by one team has to be refuted by the other. Each claim has to be refuted by the other. And as a judge, I'm looking at all those claims independently on my paper in an organized manner. So as you address one argument, I look at both of those and I weigh and I determine which one I believe. Well, if one argument is so powerful and so strong or so just really well developed, or maybe it's just true, that argument can be applied to other arguments in the debate other than the one that's actually answered. So another example of that could be when we say that marginalized workers continue to suffer discrimination. And we can, claim that there's an article out there that says, hey, look, a lot of these businesses are going to be more upset at progressives and Democrats for passing legislation as they guarantee jobs, because that's going to mean that they lose workers. That means that they're going to lose leverage and not paying a living wage. They're going to have to pay their workers more. So then we may see a backlash, right? And that backlash may happen politically. They'll elect some strong person who really doesn't care about the people, cares more about being strong themselves, and they uses all the money to make their own company stronger, and they just hurt the workers. Well, then you say the workers are actually going to be hurt even more, right? So if workers are hurt more, and you're trying to say that your plan solves workers being hurt and harmed through discrimination, then we can also say that that argument can be cross-applied to solvency and say that workers are hurt more, so you're not going to reduce poverty. Basically, what cross-applying means is that you can place one argument, tell me what it is, give me the recitement, recite the argument, your opponent's argument, give me the refutation, clinch that argument by telling me what it means in the overall picture of the debate, tie it back to some stock issue or a larger issue in the debate. And then when you cross-apply that, that saves you time as you go on to another issue. Because you'll notice sometimes, and this will happen all the time once you get really good at debate, is that you'll have a good argument and then that can be applied. And what I mean by applied is you can use that argument to address other arguments in the debate. So for example, if you're playing soccer, right, and you have a great defender, and this defender is so good that it can take out every forward and every opportunity for any scorer from the other team to be able to make a goal. Well, that person, as you're cross-applying that defender to all of the great offensive players in that team to stop them from scoring. Same thing in basketball. If you have a great defender, and this defender is great at blocking shots, and they're great at getting out of the perimeter, and they're great at stopping, preventing problems, right? Then you want to make sure that you put that defender all over the offense against your opponent to prevent them from scoring. Same thing in debate. If you have a strong argument, you want to put that argument as many places on the flow, and you'll learn more about what the flow is, because right now you probably are considering that the flow makes no sense, which it's okay. but you want to cross-apply those arguments, and that saves you a lot of time. And that's important to do. One of the last things we're doing is extending and impacting the argument. So if you're able to cross-apply an argument, that's good. If you can't cross-apply it, that's okay. But when you extend an argument, what that means is that you tell me that a federal jobs guarantee won't reduce poverty, but it's going to cause inflation. Extending that argument also means two different things. Number one, it means you can extend that argument and apply it to our relationship with China, for example. Yeah, and say, well, if we actually cause inflation, that means that China has more leverage in negotiations with the US about their own currency and about what they do in their own country, which is going to make China stronger, which means that the US one day could, be bowing down to what China wants in the global market, which means that could be disadvantageous for US businesses, making the US dollar crash, creating more poverty, maybe creating civil war, and oh no, the world could end, right? So you want to be able to extend an impact, right? So China getting stronger, and China getting stronger may be a good thing, depending on your perspective. I'm not taking a side here. What I'm saying is you have to be able to think about everything that can happen. The United States dollar crashing, our economy going berserk, poverty ensuing for everyone, all because of this federal jobs guarantee, right, that rippled throughout the global economy. So the impact of that is obviously death, violence, the quality of life goes down. So tell me what it means when something's not solved. So in essence, the negative now creates harms from the affirmative plan, right? And so there are also many ways that you can show that directly these things happen. And that comes from other positions that we'll talk about later. So now that you've heard the general ways that you're going to approach the government team, the affirmative team, make sure that you understand the argument by reciting it. Okay, and this is every time. And it may sound weird and awkward at first because it may sound too formal and robotic as you're reciting the arguments. The better you get and the more you debate, the more experienced you'll get, and you'll be able to create more flow, and you'll be able to sound better to yourself and to the judge and to others as you have an internal argument structure. And that's how you recite, refute, clinch, tie back, and how you cross-apply and extend arguments. It's very important to do those things. But remember, if you get lost, you just provide refutation. Okay. Remember, you have to disagree with everything your opponent said. And that means give examples. That means you have evidence that we've researched ahead of time. That means you think of things on your feet during the debate. You'll think of answers as you're doing this. And you'll be able to go, oh, I just thought of that. You're going to write it down. You're going to get up. You'll explain it. You may not have evidence, but you'll be able to give me a story as to why, if you spend lots of money without making lots of money, how that could create more problems. I'm not sure, whatever you want. There are more ways that you can do debating on the negative. This lecture was about on-case debating, the first on-case debate. You're going to learn how to take notes and flow the debate, because you just don't ask these questions out of nowhere and write these things down, anywhere frivolously. There's a way that you track the arguments in the debate round. So we're going to learn about that. And we're also going to learn about off-case debating, which is for the negative to do. The affirmative has to answer off-case debates. And these are focused on topicality, disadvantages, counterplans, critiques. And these are some difficult theory that you're going to be learning over time. Our emphasis for the next few weeks is going to be on topicality and disadvantages especially. And then counterplans and critiques, we're going to really focus on those a lot over the late winter and the springtime. For now, remember, as you're debating, to disagree with your opponent. Make sure you have fun in the debate. Be enthusiastic about every point. It's okay to be humorous, but you don't want to make fun of your opponent, right? Especially if you're winning the debate and you can feel that your opponent is not near your level and it can become embarrassing. Make sure that you're encouraging by doing your best, okay? Not by insulting them, right? Make sure you're going the full time, because that shows appreciation for the round. And also that person's learning from you, right? Because you will defeat people or be defeated by people who will one day reverse that role and beat you, or you will beat them in the activity. And so just learn from that, but make sure as the negative, you always try and win and never let your opponent win a stock issue. All right. Thank you. We'll see you in the next video.